Hi, Erica. Incoming chair of the Jain Engelberg Memorial Fellowship Advisory Group for 2020. And on the line, I have Bev Yasher and Erica Bruning. And I will give them a minute to introduce themselves.
So welcome, everybody. As Sarah said, I'm Bev Yasher. I am the outgoing chair of the JEMF Advisory Group, and I'm excited to welcome, it looks like we now have 10 of you here to our call to be able to help you guys think about what it looks like to navigate an application to the JEMF for funding in 2020. I'll turn it over to Erica, and then I think we'll open it up for questions.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica Bruning. I'm NSGC's Special Projects Coordinator, and today I'll be really functioning as a moderator for today's discussion. So a friendly reminder to everyone here, if you've attended an NSGC webinar, it's the same format. Please just type your questions that you have into the Zoom webinar chat box, and then I'll go ahead and read your questions aloud here for Sarah and Bev to answer. And with that, I think we can go ahead and just kick it off with today's first question. So Bev and Sarah, if someone had a question here sort of about their research experience, the question being, I only have limited research experience, how will this impact my chances of being chosen for a JEMF award?
So Sarah, do you want to tackle that question?
Sure. So we want to welcome applications from investigators at all stages of their careers and at all levels of research experience. The most important thing to us is that in your application, you demonstrate that you have the ability and the resources you need to execute the project. So we would encourage you to apply, and in that application to discuss your relevant experience and how that will contribute to the success of your project, but also in areas where you may not have a lot of experience. We strongly encourage you to work with mentors, co-PIs, or consultants, and name those on your project to fill in the gaps for any shortcomings in knowledge or experience that you may not have personally. And one aspect that we're really focusing more on this year than in previous years is mentorship. So we want to emphasize, and this may come up more later on in the Q&A, but we really want to emphasize the importance of mentorship, not only for young investigators, but for investigators at all stages of their career. So for those of you who watched our recorded informational webinar, you have already heard some of this information, but we're encouraging all applicants to identify an application advisor who can help them develop their JEMF application, and then also to name project mentors on their application, individuals with specific content expertise who would assist in providing content expertise for a funded project. So just to summarize, we don't in any way want limited research experience to deter a person from applying for the JEMF award. We encourage young investigators to apply, and we would just ask that you think about where the gaps in your experience may be and how others on your project team and mentors can help you to fill those gaps.
Great, thank you, Sarah. This is sort of a similar question here, but really just building off of your previous answer here. What about for those potential applicants that have never been awarded a grant before? Will that impact their chances here with the JEMF Advisory Group and their applications?
So I think I can tackle that question. And I want to remind everybody what the mission is of the JEMF. And our goal as a funding agency is to provide support for people at all stages of their career to pursue scholarly endeavors. And as Sarah highlighted so nicely in the answer to the previous question, we're really thinking hard about the ways in which funding by JEMF can support professional development So within that context, the level of experience of a potential applicant to the JEMF is not really a relevant factor. The vast majority of genetic counselors who are extremely well published in our discipline have never obtained their own grant, and that can be for a variety of reasons. And so as a consequence, this in and of itself will not hurt any individual's applicant, any individual who's applying for an application. The really important thing, as Sarah highlighted, is that you need to demonstrate that you have the experience either within your own skill set or as provided by the other members of your research team to execute the project and to execute all phases of the project. And so we encourage everybody to think really carefully, not just about what I need to have in my research committee, what I need to have in my mentor, but to also then map that onto the actual project itself so that the grant application highlights how the advisory group can be assured that your proposal will actually support your professional development. And this is one of the reasons why we've made this new push this past year to build an individual development plan, or to ask for an individual development plan, to encourage applicants to identify mentors, and then in addition to think about what application advisors would look like overall. And so the short answer is never having been awarded a grant before in no way impacts how the application is reviewed by the advisory group, and it actually sits right within our mission as a funding agency. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think anything else to add. That's a good summary. Thank you.
Now, thinking a little bit more about actually getting to submitting the proposal. The question is, can I submit a proposal with someone else as a co-PI?
I can take that one. So yes, absolutely. That is something that we commonly see among awardees, is to have more than one co-PI, although other proposals are submitted with a single PI, and that's also fine. There may be advantages to having multiple PIs. It can broaden the skill set of the project leadership. It can divide the work, so less work per lead investigator, and they can cover for each other in some ways. One PI may be able to provide some types of mentorship to the other. And it also can be a nice way if you're feeling a little bit hesitant about potentially embarking on a JEMF project. It can be a nice way to make that feel a little bit more accessible, to have another person who's co-leading the project with you. So we welcome applications with a single PI or with co-PIs.
Great. Our next question here is from an applicant here who's applied in the past, but their proposal wasn't chosen. The question is, how can I determine if I should submit again? What advice do you have for past applicants about resubmitting their proposals in the future?
So I'll tackle at least parts of that. This is a huge question. And unfortunately is more the rule than the exception when any individual or group of individuals are applying for funding. We know there's always more interest than there are available funds to be able to support the interests of those individuals. And so from the perspective of the AG, we want to highlight that not getting funded in the first round doesn't in any way minimize the importance of your research or the likelihood that you might be funded in a second round. And so we encourage those individuals who are thinking about resubmitting to reach out to a member of the JEMF committee and discuss exactly how to look at a resubmission. For those of you who have never submitted to the JEMF, each application receives a fairly detailed summary of how the advisory group looked at your proposal, what were areas in which it might be improved, altered, maybe refocused. And we look at those ongoing conversations with the advisory group as a natural part of the evolution of anybody's research focus. Many awardees who were not accepted on the first round were then funded on subsequent attempts. So if I try to unpack that a little bit more and think about what are some of the reasons why an application might not be funded, it's generally not a single thing that makes or breaks an application. It's more likely that there are many factors that made it maybe less strong than the proposal that was funded this year. And in the resubmission process, we strongly encourage those individuals to highlight how they've strengthened the application. And it is a competition, and as I highlighted in the beginning, there's only enough funding for one application, and it may be that your proposal was outstanding, it was well written, and it was pretty highly rated, but another equally well written and well rated high caliber project was chosen. And it may be because it was slightly better received by the committee. It may be because it was more timely in terms of its focus with regard to what are key issues, reminding you that part of our mission is to drive innovation in the field of genetic counseling. That's a broad concept, and innovation can be a fairly subjective process. So it doesn't mean that it's not innovative. It may be that another project was slightly more innovative. The other area that often creates challenges in the review of a submitted proposal is that the content of the grant itself doesn't give enough data to the advisory group, the review group, to really evaluate the proposal in totality and by extension, the primary investigator's ability to execute that project. This is one of the reasons why we've implemented the variety of different supports that we think are critical, including mentorship and the application advisor. And we strongly encourage everybody to reach out to the AG if you maybe receive some feedback that suggested there was some failure to communicate tightly with us about what your perspectives were. Another reason why a proposal may not be funded would be that the scope was broader than could be accomplished in a 2-year time frame or within the context of the amount of funding for the award. Money is always an issue. We, as researchers and genetic counselors, think big. Why wouldn't you? You're hoping to make big changes, but we're looking for a realistic mesh between what you want to accomplish in that 2-year period and what you're telling us you believe you can accomplish in that 2-year period. I'd like to highlight that we increased the amount of the award this year to ensure that there was sufficient funding both for the support of the individual investigators' time and effort, and then additionally, that there's then additionally sufficient funds for the project itself. And so we're trying to make sure that that funding of the project isn't out of whack, but we leave it to the investigator to convince us that they can get it done in 2 years and that they have the funding for it. It may be that there are some less broad sweeping issues and maybe some fine tuning that's required. Maybe the method was inappropriate. Maybe the research question was not as fully fleshed out for us as the advisory group. And then coming back to where we started in the webinar, the question about where are the skills of the individuals on the proposal in terms of where it becomes a growth opportunity, but we also really want to be sure that at the end of those 2 years that the investigator is able to accomplish their goals. And it may have been that the team itself was lacking in specific skill sets and required additional expertise, additional mentors. And so it's a complicated set of reasons why proposals are not funded. At the end of the day, nobody likes a no. And I want to highlight that it's not a no thank you. It's a no, not this year, but please consider and come back to us. And this is one of the roles that we as an advisory group see as central to our purview, which is to continue to help those who are looking for funding figure out how to get to a yes at the end of the process. So, Sarah, do you want to add anything to this at this point?
Just a couple of points to emphasize from what you said, Bev. So the proposals that we receive and the advisory group reviews are very high quality. We're consistently impressed. And so just as Bev said, it's very rarely a question of the proposal not being high quality, because almost all of them are very high quality. And I think it's most often some combination of the scope just is a little too broad for the 2-year project period, and there may be some gaps in the expertise of the project team. And so we are hopeful that by encouraging applicants to work with an application advisor to help them develop that application, these application advisors are largely individuals who have served on the advisory group before or are past awardees. And so they really have a pretty good sense of what's a realistic scope, and can also help you think through the expertise that you might need on your project. Those of them who are previous awardees may also be willing to share feedback that they received from the advisory group on their first application and how they incorporated that feedback into a reapplication, because many, I should say some of the past awardees who ended up being very successful didn't receive the funding the first time around, but actually reapplied. We do, when we review applications on the advisory group, we do put a lot of thought into trying to provide feedback on how to improve the application. And so, as Bev said, we don't mean it to be a no, but rather here's some feedback that we believe will really strengthen this application and give it a better chance of funding in a reapplication. So if you are in that position where your application does not get funded the first time around, we really strongly encourage you to, as Bev said, keep in touch with the advisory group, work with an application advisor to incorporate the advisory group's feedback, and really don't lose sight of that project, but really just try to make modifications that might strengthen it.
Great, thank you both. All right, our next question here has to do with IRB approval. So the question is, I'm interested in pursuing a study involving multiple hospitals and think I need to get central IRB approval, but have been told this is costly. Do you know if others in the past have used their JEMF funds for this cost?
So this is thank you for that question. I'm going to say right up front, I don't know the full answer to this question. I think that the funding that relates to the material cost for the project can be used in any setting that is appropriate. And this would be a place where it would make a lot of sense for you as a potential applicant to explain why you want to do this. We do look really, really carefully at the budget, as I highlighted before and as Sarah has talked about in her follow-up, to make sure that there is enough funding to cover all the aspects of the project. One thing that we have seen past awardees do is go to their parent institution or institutions and see if they might be able to get some buy-in from the individuals who are at these multiple hospitals towards this cost. It can be a great way to coalesce your community around the research. But at the end of the day, the short answer is I don't believe that we would say no to a proposal that was using funding to get a multi-center IRB approved. We would just want to make sure that you had enough funding for all the other downstream pieces to then implement the project after you'd gotten the IRB approval. Sarah, do you have any additional thoughts on this question?
No, I just, as you said, I think that justifying if it is something that you are unable to secure institutional funding or other funding for this aspect of the project, if you really address that in your application and justify the need for that expense, I think that's important. And we do, as Bev said, review the budget very carefully and sometimes provide feedback on how the budget is allocated. So it could be that that is included as a line item in your budget, but the advisory group may give feedback about that particular item. So I think it's really just more of a conversation. But as Bev said, I encourage you to consider whether there may be other sources of funding for that expense. But it's not a clear yes or no answer.
Okay, our next question here gets into what type of research JEMF is looking for. Are there certain research priorities of JEMF that applicants should be aware of?
Yes, and over the past year, under Bev's leadership of the advisory group, we really addressed this question and really tried to think about in our strategic plan for the next few years, what are our research priorities? And so these were also included in our informational webinar. So you'll have those in writing as well, but we encourage in particular applications that are focused on developing innovative approaches or service delivery models for genetic counseling practice that focus on improving access to genetic counseling, especially among underserved populations, that think about how to promote growth and competence in students and in practicing genetic counselors, that are focused on diversity and inclusion and building a more diverse and inclusive workforce, and proposals that address some unmet need of a specific client population or populations. So I think that these research priorities, they can apply in many different specialties, many different types of applications. We do encourage you to think about how your idea may address one or more of these priorities, and to highlight that in your application. But we also don't want these research priorities to limit your thinking. So we encourage you to think creatively, to expand beyond what's explicitly written in these research priorities. So we don't want them to limit you, but hope that they can guide your thinking a bit. Bev, anything else to add?
Yeah, I want to add just a couple of things. I think that this is a great place to touch base with the chair of the advisory group, in other words, Sarah. If you have a question, you're like, I'm not sure if this really fits or not. Because we really we didn't struggle, we thought really hard this past year about if the idea of setting out research priorities would limit the types of applications that we would get. And I want to reemphasize or continue to echo what Sarah said, that we don't want to limit the creativity of our membership and the ways in which they want to use their skill sets and their perspectives as genetic counselors and going into novel areas that haven't been explored before. And I think having a conversation with either the chair of the advisory group or potentially your application advisor may help you continue to think about how that your idea meshes with what we're looking for in the JEMF. In conjunction with that, it's also really important to look at what are other funding mechanisms and to see if your idea meshes with some of the priorities of other funding mechanisms too. This is a really common approach for those who maybe spend 100% of their time in research to try to match their interests with those of the funding agency. And we see JEMF as having an extremely broad perspective. Some of you on the call may know that ABGC has also put out a call for research proposals. There may be some funding within your own institution that may relate to your career stage. I'm not saying please don't apply to JEMF, but it's also a really good idea to look carefully at how to mesh where you are, who you are, and what your idea is with what are the overall perspectives of the group. And to remind you that for us as JEMF, we're really trying to drive innovation in the field of genetic counseling through scholarly endeavors. That's a hugely broad mission. And the research priorities that Sarah articulated, just articulated for everybody on the call, and we shared in our informational webinar, are ways of really slicing and dicing those ideas around innovation. But at the end of the day, if you have an innovative idea that you think doesn't fit in one of these bins, that doesn't mean that JEMF is not the right home for you.
Great, thank you both. I know we're coming up here in about 3 minutes left in today's Q&A, so I think at this point, Bev and Sarah, I'd like to open it up to see if you have any closing remarks here that you'd like to leave today's attendees with. Any last minute advice or any other thoughts that you have here to share with all of those that might be interested in submitting to JEMF.
Sure, I'll start. I just want to loop back actually to the first question about amount of prior research experience, and just again emphasize that we really encourage applications from investigators at any career stage and any level of research experience. So if you're feeling a little bit on the fence, not sure if you're ready for applying to the JEMF, we encourage you to take the plunge. And we've really tried to put a lot of thought into how to support applicants. So as Bev said, we encourage you to reach out to the advisory group if you have questions. And we can also help you identify an application advisor who would be a good fit based on your research idea. That person can then help you with your application throughout the process. And it's not too early to start thinking, at least at this stage, really thinking through your research idea and potential study design, and then working with an application advisor so you still have plenty of time to think through and really plan out your project proposal before the deadline in early May. So again, we really encourage you all to apply if you have even just a germ of an idea, and we want to do whatever we can to help support applicants. So don't hesitate to reach out. Bev?
Yes, so I absolutely agree with everything Sarah said, and if I try to like maybe consolidate it down a little bit, we look at this as a partnership between those who want to do research and the advisory group. And our job is not to say thumbs up or thumbs down, end of story. Our job is to help you build your capacity as in these scholarly endeavors. So thank you guys so much. And please reach out to us.
All right, thank you all so much. A recording of today's Q&A will be available on the NSGC website within the next couple of days. Thank you all.